to see y'all here tonight on Night School. I'm going to start with some sports. We're not going to talk X's and O's, but what we are going to talk is dollars and cents. A couple nights ago, the WNBA had their annual draft. It was by far the biggest draft in WNBA history. I'm not just talking about talent. I'm talking about the level of attention that this draft got. And of course, the reason why the level of attention was so high was because Caitlin Clark, perhaps the most celebrated women's basketball player in college in a generation, was there. Angel Reese, perhaps the most beloved and famous women's college basketball player in the hood in urban America, and really maybe the second most famous in the world, right? And the second most celebrated in the world right now from college, was in the draft. And a bunch of other people were in the draft as well. We had the center from USC. We had a bunch of folk who were in the draft. And this was a celebrated class, a talented class. But despite all that talent, despite all of that celebration, the fact is these women are not going to be paid a reasonable sum for their efforts. They're not going to get the money that they deserve. Women athletes in general don't get the money they deserve, but WNBA players are right at the top of that list. The reason we're even having a conversation about WNBA players is because Caitlin Clark, and I'm just gonna be honest with you. Some of y'all are gonna say I'm wrong. Some of y'all are gonna say I'm just loving the white woman like on some Uncle Ruckus stuff. But the fact of the matter is, the reason we're talking about women's basketball right now is because of Caitlin Clark. And Caitlin Clark, despite being maybe the best college player we've ever seen, I mean, there's Cheryl Miller, there's Maya Moore, there's a bunch, Cheryl Swoops, there's some legends there, but she's certainly the best of her generation. She's certainly the hottest prospect we've seen in a long time. And when we look at Caitlin Clark's salary, and I'm using her as an example because she's the #1 draft pick, and in the NBA and in the WNBA, you get paid to scale. It's not like the old days where each player had to negotiate their own deal. If you're the #1 pick in the draft, you're going to make the most. It's just a fact. And Caitlin Clark, this is her deal right here. I don't want y'all to think that I'm being dramatic or hyperbolic. She's the #1 pick in the draft. The #1 pick in the draft. There's nobody in front of her. There's no doubt in the world that she is the best player. There was no dispute about whether she was going to be #1. There was no dispute about whether she deserved to be #1. There was no conversation. There was not one person in the world who said, you know, Caitlin Clark may not be worth all this bread. No, every single person who watched Caitlin Clark play said, you know what, she is her. She is her. And when we look at her salary, let's look at it. She got a 4-year deal. Caitlin Clark's deal is for 4 years. $76,535 the first year. Year 2, $78,000. Year 3, $85,000. Year 4, which is an option year, $97,000. So in her 4th year, she'll be making $97,582. There's a whole lot of people who would kill for that type of money. I'm not disrespecting anybody who's a working class person or a middle class person, right? People go to college, I know first year professors that didn't make this much, and a teacher should make more than a basketball player in my mind in general. So I'm not dissing anybody who makes less than this, but what I am saying is, when you think of pro basketball, this ain't the numbers that you think about. And the reason why these numbers are so stunning, this is the salary of Victor Wembanyama. He's the #1 draft pick of the San Antonio Spurs in the NBA this past year. His first year at 20, he's going to make $12,160,680. In his fourth year, he's going to make 16,864,000. There are two club options here. So his deal, his overall deal, is worth 55,174,766. Victor Wembanyama makes $148,300 a game per game. So that means that he's going to make more today, playing today, than Caitlin Clark is going to make in the next 2 years. There is not an NBA or WNBA owner that is down to their last dollar. They all pay as little as possible. That's why they have strikes. That's why they have lockouts. That's why they have long negotiations, because the athletes want to make the most, and the athletes want and the owners want to pay the least, right? So please miss me with this whole idea that the owners are doing the best they can in the WNBA, and if only the women could generate more money, they'd be fine. That's what they tell you every year. That's what your boss tells you too, right? If only we could make a little more money as a company, we could give you a raise. You deserve the raise. You want the raise. So let's not suddenly start echoing billionaires when they ask for more money, because it's funny. And some of this is not even gender based. Sometimes when NBA players say they need more money or they want more money, a lot of y'all be like, they make enough. And it's like, I get why you might not be riding with the 1%, but when you reject the athlete's demand for more money, you're rejecting their 1% requests in the interest of the 0.00001%. In other words, yeah, you're saying these millionaires don't need more money, but the money that they're not getting is going to the billionaires. But when it comes to the women, it's not just billionaires who are cheating millionaires. This is billionaires who won't even let them be thousandaire, 100,000aires. This is a problem. And people say, well, if people watch the league, you can't expect people to make money. You can't expect people to make money if their bosses aren't making enough money. Well, here's the thing. The NBA in the 1970s, and shout out to Jamel Hill, she broke this down way better than I ever could. But in the 1970s, the NBA was not making money. The NBA was going bankrupt. This is back still when the ABA was still doing its thing and the NBA was trying to do its thing, and the leagues were split and people weren't watching NBA like that. The athletes weren't athleting. They were doing coke and drinking beers at halftime. Before Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, the NBA was not doing well, and yet still they paid their players. The average player's salary in 1970-ish was the equivalent of $245,000 a year. I'm gonna say that again. If you index for inflation, the average NBA salary back then, was $240,000 a year. The equivalent of them. Be very clear, because I don't want y'all. I know y'all be like on some well actually on Twitter, right? Y'all love a good well actually. I'm saying very clearly that it's the equivalent of it, right? When you index for inflation, it's very clear that the NBA players are being paid a lot of money. And what makes that a problem is that the league wasn't making any, but they believed that if they invested in male athletes, if they invested in the NBA, they would generate a better product, they'd get better athletes, more people would eventually watch. It takes money to make money. But when it comes to the WNBA, they don't do that. They don't do that. They don't do that. They decide that they can just pretend that nobody watches it so we don't have to pay you. The idea that nobody watches the WNBA is a lie. It is a myth. People watch the WNBA. In fact, the WNBA is peaking right now. Since COVID, people have been watching this. And again, read the work of Jamel Hill. Follow her. She even left some comments on my IG earlier that breaks this down again way better than I could. But the WNBA has viewership. Now, a lot of times people look at the stands and say, well, look, there's not a million people in the stands. Let me tell you something. The stands ain't the only game in town. See who's watching on NBA. People say not enough ticket sales. Ticket sales aren't the only measure. What about who watches on TV? Did you know since COVID, WNBA numbers have peaked? And in fact, when they air on ESPN and ABC, they do just as well as hockey. So the NHL and the WNBA are doing about the same. But no one's like, well, don't pay the hockey players. No, I agree. The more money you make, the more money you can spend. So yeah, as more people go to the stands, more people get season tickets, as they get better TV deals, etc., the league will do even better. But right now is the time to invest. Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark are stars. They are stars. They are Magic and Larry. And the league is going to grow, but you got to invest in it. Now, some of y'all say, well, that's what Caitlin Clark had a chance to make money. No, listen, Caitlin Clark is going to make money. Her endorsements, her advertising, her marketing, all that stuff is going to get her paid. I'm not worried about her. But I'm worried about the person who's not the number one pick in the draft. I'm worried about the sister who might be the number 30 pick in the draft, who's going to make $30,000 or $40,000 a year. And those people, in order to make ends meet, they also have to go overseas to play for part of the year. So that's how you end up with Brittany Griner in Russia getting locked up, because they have to travel all over the world to play a sport that their country is supposed to be the leader of. If you pay them what they're worth, you won't have to do this. That is a reality. That is a necessity, I think. And people say, well, she could have went to the big three. Why? She should not have to play in a men's 3-on-3 league in the summer instead of playing in her league in order to make a living. Shout out to Ice Cube. I thought he made a great offer. I thought he made a great business deal. But if Caitlin Clark or anybody else goes to the big three, it just reinforces the idea that they can't make money in the WNBA. And again, I'd love for the big three to thrive. I'd love for them women to play over in the big three when it makes sense, if it makes sense. I have some basketball issues with it. But fundamentally, this shouldn't be
the blueprint, the game plan was made in the 80s. Create a pandemic, with a virus that's going wild, right? Fauci was given like over $350 million to research this, to come up with drugs, new or repurposed, to handle the AIDS pandemic. And all they came up with was AZT. Back then, AZT. Now, remdesivir until we get a vaccine, which, by the way, Anthony Fauci had stake in the Moderna vaccine. And we know Pfizer is one of the most criminally corrupt organizations ever. The fine they paid was the biggest in the history of the DOJ in 2009. Like, what are we talking about? We're going to put our full trust in science that can't be questioned.
Aaron Rodgers is good at throwing. Aaron Rodgers is good at planning. Aaron Rodgers is good at playmaking. Aaron Rodgers is good at strategizing. Aaron Rodgers is not good at thinking about politics or science. And the problem with Aaron Rodgers is that he thinks that he is smarter than he is. He thinks that he knows more than he does. And he has a kind of arrogance that is disguised as intellectual inquiry. And so he comes on and he just says the dumbest shit possible. I will say this. He is right about one thing. He is not a scientist. He is not an epidemiologist. And yes, he does his own research. Good for you, Aaron Rodgers. You should do your own research. Everybody should read and study for themselves. Everybody should learn for themselves. Nobody should take the government at face value. Nobody should take science at face value. Everybody should do their own research. However, you gotta know something. If you didn't follow what just happened here, Aaron Rodgers is at war with the medical establishment and the government. He has been obsessed with Dr. Anthony Fauci for years now. And he believes that the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, with the leadership of Fauci, helped to engineer the HIV/AIDS epidemic of the 1980s with the support of the US government. Now, if you don't know Dr. Fauci, of course, was very instrumental in dealing with HIV/AIDS in the 80s. He was trying to stop it, not create it. But Aaron Rodgers, as you just heard, said the blueprint, the game plan was made in the 80s. Now, there's criticism to be made of Fauci in the 80s. 100,000 people would die between 1981 and 1990 from AIDS. And the government response wasn't strong enough. More could have been done. They got hundreds of $millions to research. That's all true. But Rodgers' argument is that they created a pandemic, made people go wild, and then just use it as a cash cow. There's no evidence of that. Again, I'm not one of them people that trust the US government. I don't. I'm not one of those people that believes the government say it must be true. That's not the case. I am not one of those people that believes that conspiracy theories are for crackpots only. Rather, I simply don't believe that just because somebody has a fear of it, that makes it true, right? You have a fear of the government conspiracy. It doesn't mean that everything is a conspiracy. You got to show me something. You got to give me some evidence. You got to give me some proof. Now, Aaron Rodgers offers the proof. He says, well, look, AZT. I don't know if y'all know AZT. That is a drug used to treat HIV/AIDS. It's short for azidothymidine. Azidothymidine. AZT is all we know it as, right? He says AZT killed more people than the virus itself. In other words, they made a drug that they could sell that didn't work but made a lot of money and it actually killed more people than HIV/AIDS itself or than AIDS itself. But here's the problem. It ain't true. Show me one shred of evidence that that AZT killed more people than AIDS. That's wild. It's untrue. And guess what? They still use AZT. You know why? Because it works. Because it works. They continue to make these talking points that Fauci had money invested in COVID-19 vaccines. He didn't. But you know what? They don't care. They don't care about the truth. When I say they, I mean the conspiracy theorists. I mean the right-wingers who sprinkle these lies out and dumb people believe it. And the problem with Aaron Rodgers is he sounds smart to people who are dumb. So when he says, well, just like Fauci made money off of AZT in the past, he's now making money off remdesivir now. Except Fauci didn't invent remdesivir, contrary to what people say. He didn't make money off of remdesivir. He said he has a stake in the Moderna vaccine. Now, I can't prove that Fauci doesn't have a stake in the Moderna vaccine, but I've never seen any evidence, not one scintilla of evidence that he does. We can't just say something is true because we say it's true. Show me some evidence of it. If you show me evidence of it, I can believe it. But nothing Aaron Rodgers has said is true. Nothing that has been proven true. Nothing that Aaron Rodgers has done has been demonstrated to be based in anything. So why do we believe Aaron Rodgers? Why should we believe Aaron Rodgers? There's no good reason to believe Aaron Rodgers. The danger of Aaron Rodgers. It's not just, you might say, well, why are you spending your time talking about Aaron Rodgers? Because unfortunately, there's a large swath of people who will believe Aaron Rodgers simply because he's famous and because he speaks with authority. And Aaron Rodgers is, he positions himself as the smart athlete. And so he has that chip on his shoulder. Like, well, you think athletes are dumb, but I'm a smart athlete. You think I'm a dumb athlete, but I'm not. I went to Berkeley. He did go to Berkeley. That's a fact. Aaron Rodgers went to Berkeley for 1 year. After going to Butte College, or is it Butte? It's Butte. I want to say it's Butte just because it's funny, but it might be Butte College, whatever it is. He went to community college, Butte Community College for a year. No disrespect to community college, great place to learn, great use of public resources. And then he went to Cal Berkeley for a year. He didn't go on a Genius Scholarship. He didn't get on a MacArthur Genius Grant. He didn't go as a member of Mensa. He went as a dude that could throw the deep football. And he stayed for a year and he went pro. Senator Tom Cotton is ginning up violence against pro-Palestinian protesters. Tom Cotton, if you don't know, is the senator from Arkansas, Republican senator from Arkansas, and he is getting some backlash. Why? Because he decided that people who are protesting in the streets to end the genocide in Gaza need to be handled. They need to be dealt with. He didn't say that language, but he said something that might have been worse. This man goes on to Elon Musk's Twitter and sends this tweet out. He says, I encourage people who get stuck behind the pro-Hamas mobs blocking traffic, take matters into your own hands to get them out of the way. It's time to put an end to this nonsense. This is dangerous stuff. So first of all, let's look at what Tom Cotton does. First, he frames everybody who is supporting an end to the genocide in Gaza, people who want an end to the Israel-Hamas war, what I call the Israel's war on Gaza, whatever you want to call it, people want it to end. That doesn't make you pro-Hamas. There are people in Israel that want it to end. Are you saying all those citizens of Israel that say, please, Prime Minister Netanyahu, please end this war, they're all pro-Hamas too? Come on, Tom Cotton. Even if they are pro-Hamas, let's unpack what that means. Right? I don't want to just demonize that discourse either. But what's interesting is the use of it to make it seem as if the people on the streets are supporting something evil, thereby justifying anything you do to them as legitimate. He doesn't call them free speech protesters. He calls them pro-Hamas mobs. And I'm getting to the good part, but this is interesting. This is interesting. And I'm going to tell you why. He doesn't call the people who are using their free speech right to defend Palestinians, to speak to Palestinian human rights or Palestinian self-determination. He doesn't use that First Amendment option. He doesn't talk about them as First Amendment worthy people. No, he talks about them as mobs, again, as criminals. He says, take matters into your own hands to get them out of the way. It's time to put an end to this nonsense. So he's saying people who are doing civil disobedience, people who are blocking traffic, people who are walking across bridges, people who are doing sit-ins, that all of them are criminals. They're pro-Hamas mobs. They're pro-terrorist mobs that need to be handled. How should you handle them? By taking matters into your own hands. He's literally implying that you should physically do something to get those people out the way. Now, here's the thing about Tom Cotton. If Tom Cotton said, look, I don't believe that people, even in the context of free speech, should be causing disruption, should be causing unrest. I don't believe that people who use their First Amendment rights of free speech should impede upon other people's free movement. I don't believe that people should be causing problems. I'd say, fine, I don't respect that view of the First Amendment. But I get your point, right? I want to get to work too. I don't need nobody blocking the highway. I'd rather not be blocking the highway. But if you're speaking for Palestine, or you're speaking for reproductive freedom, or you're speaking for environmental justice, or you're speaking for a gajillion other issues, reparations, cool. I'm not tripping, but I get the frustration if Tom Cotton is purely just frustrated with people blocking. But here's the thing about Tom Cotton. Just yesterday, this same man who's pissed off about Palestinian advocates and Palestinian allies marching in the street and calling them criminals, the very same guy who's tough on crime publicly supports the people who bum rushed the Capitol and staged an insurrection against the U.S. government. Oh, Tommy. Oh, Tommy. Tommy. So you good with staging a full damn near coup of the government. You're cool with an insurrection against the government. But oh, them people blocking bridges. That's too far. And the whole thing, let's be honest here, the whole thing is BS. They spend every January celebrating Martin Luther King Jr., romanticizing civil rights, acting like them or their parents weren't the ones telling Bull Connor's dogs to bite, like they weren't the ones struggling against civil rights, that they weren't the ones stopping Ruby Bridges from getting into the school. But let's get past that. They're actually saying that what Dr. King did was great. Well, how do you think the Pettus Bridge protest happened? You think cars were driving through the civil rights leaders and the civil rights activists? Of course not. Of course not. They stop traffic. When there's a sit-in inside of a restaurant or a library or any other public accommodation, they're disrupting. The whole point of protest, the whole point of civil disobedience is to break the law for a just cause, what John Lewis called good trouble. So y'all love good trouble when you're dreaming about the 60s. Y'all love to pretend that you would have been down with Dr. King. But when the rubber meets the road, when it's happening in your era, when you have an opportunity to actually speak on justice, you say, take matters into your own hands to get them out of the way. Look, I'm not no lawyer, so I'll let the lawyer speak to this. This feels like incitement. It feels like you are literally encouraging people to engage in acts of violence against protesters. And that, for me, is disgusting. Senator Cotton. That's terrible, Senator Cotton. An undercover cop was beaten by his colleagues at a protest. I don't know if y'all understand this. I don't know if y'all know this story. But an undercover cop, his name, Luther Hall. Luther Hall, this is him right here. He was asked to be an undercover cop at a public protest in St. Louis following the acquittal of St. Louis police officer John Stockley, who killed a black man. So John Stockley kills a black man, there's protests, and of course the police like to put police in the crowd to manage, to surveil, to assess what's going on and lock people up. Well, Officer Luther Hall said, I'll go do it. So Luther Hall goes into the crowd and he pretends to be a protester. He pretends to be an undercover cop. Now, you know, if you are undercover cop at a Black Lives Matter protest or at an anti-police brutality protest or whatever it is, you got to be a certain kind of Negro. So it's hard for me to have so much sympathy, because, you know, if he's there, he's there defending his peers, his colleagues probably. He's like, yeah, you know, these guys getting mad at the police for beating up a black dude or shooting a black dude. Sometimes we got to do what we got to do. Y'all don't understand what it's like out here. And then his black ass goes in there as an undercover cop for the cops in their interest against the protesters who are battling the cops. And guess what happens? The police whoop his ass too. During the protest, Officer Luther Hall was beaten by 3 of his former colleagues, Randy Hayes, Dustin Boone, and Christopher Myers. So this man, y'all looking at right now, was beaten by 3 people, including this man, who was one of the 3 people who beat him. Because even though he's their colleague, they might have shared a desk for all I know. I don't know how close they were, but I know this. But white people often don't recognize black people out of context. I got colleagues at not where I work now, but when I worked at Temple and other places where I'm telling you, like, I legit would be like next door to somebody. My office was next door to theirs for 5 years. And they speak to me when I'm in the hallway, but the moment we get downstairs, they don't recognize me. Don't, God forbid, we up the street or in a restaurant in another part of town on a Friday night, and I just say, hey, Jim. And they go, I'm sorry, how do I know you? We work together, Jim. So they didn't recognize his black ass at the protest, and they're already looking for black people to mess with, and he's there. Well, they beat the brakes off of him, and Luther Hall endured a herniated disc. I mean, they got him good. He got a herniated disc. He got a broken jaw or a jaw injury. I don't know if it was broken, but I suspect it was broken because they said he couldn't eat. And then he had to undergo multiple surgeries, developing gallstones. Now, despite being served while incarcerated for a civil rights violation, Randy Hayes, never replied to the lawsuit. And his claims against the other two officers, Boone and Myers, are still pending. But let me tell you something. Brother got paid $23.5 million. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. I mean, some of y'all like, I'll get my ass whooped for $23.5 million. I can't say that I wouldn't. I don't know if I sign up for it, but I could sleep a lot better knowing I'm getting that much money. I'll just say that. But nevertheless, the point of the story is, the moral of the story is, police officer, you think that claims of police brutality against black people are exaggerated? Well, turns out they weren't. So you had to learn that lesson the hard way. Now, again, I'm not happy you got your ass whooped, but I hope you learned a valuable lesson. A federal women's prison in California is being closed down by the U.S. Bureau of Prisons after a multitude of cases found staff was sexually abusing people in custody. It's called the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin. The closure of that institution follows a series of criminal trials of former correctional officers who were found to have repeatedly sexually abused incarcerated women. According to the Associated Press, 8 FCI Dublin employees have been charged with sexually abusing incarcerated women since 2021. 5 have pled guilty. 2 were convicted at trial, including Ray Garcia, the former warden who ran the facility. And of course, there's one case that's still pending. The warden of the facility is even in the mix. The idea that a women's prison or any prison would be closed for sexual violence should not be surprising, because sexual violence happens in every single prison in America. But this one was egregious even for prisons. A 2022 investigation revealed that the facility was known as the Rape Club. The staff called it that, and so did the residents. The Rape Club. Now, if you didn't know, FCI Dublin is one of, I believe, 6 women-only federal prisons in the United States. They incarcerate about 600 people. They're all going to be transferred out and going to other places. But the Bureau of Prisons director, her name is Colette Peters, said no employees will be losing their jobs. I'll say that again. No employees will be losing their jobs. How is nobody going to lose their job? How do we explain that? How do we justify that? How do we communicate that to a public? Nobody's getting fired. The place was known as the Rape Club. Now, some people say, well, it's consensual. There's nothing consensual when you're locked in a cage. That's like saying Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings were consensual. No, you don't fall in love as an enslaved person. You survive. When you're in that cage in a prison, you may desire somebody else. You're locked in a cage, but you cannot, as you're being dominated, as you're being locked up, be consensual. But the problem is, they're not even saying that people just had relationships. They're saying that the correctional officers were actually abusing these women. There's an accountability that the prison has. And they're committed, it seems, to shirking it, excuse me. They had a narrative that it was the Rape Club. People knew people were being sexually assaulted. They didn't investigate it properly. And then when it came out, what did they do? They shut the prison down. Now, I know some of you are saying, good, they shut that awful place down. I feel you. But a few weeks ago, a judge appointed a special master to oversee the operations in Dublin. They wanted to make sure people were protected. They wanted to see what was going on in the institution. They wanted to get to the bottom of the truth of things. So what they do, they shut the whole thing down so that there's no accountability. There's no truth telling. There's no deep investigation. They shut it all down. They shut it all down. And then they shipped those women out all over the country. I don't think you understand. When you got to go 200, 300, 400 miles in a prison van, in shackles, what they call rough rides, one of the toughest things you can encounter as an incarcerated person. So they know what they're doing. But the point here is that this prison is not exceptional. It's only exceptional in the sense that they got caught. It's only exceptional because of scale. But every single prison you go to, people are being sexually assaulted. People are being sexually exploited. People are being raped. People are being impregnated. All these things happen inside of women's prisons. And except for impregnation, this happens in men's prisons too. All kinds of abuse. But we pretend that it's normal. Rape culture pretends that prison rape is normal. They make jokes about prison rape. Oh, don't drop the soap. We normalize sexual violence in incarceration facilities. We cannot do that anymore. We simply cannot. But that's what's going on there. We'll continue to cover it. What we need here is not just shutting down the prison, although that's important. We shut all prisons down, as far as I'm concerned. But we need accountability for what happened. We need truth and reconciliation for what happened.